Welcome to Season 5, Episode 2 of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan, and today I have on a senior data analyst slash writer for Pro Football Focus, Nick Akridge. Nick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to finally be here.
Yeah, today we're going to be breaking down Washington's defensive depth chart heading into training camp and basically heading into the preseason. What are some positions to look at? Some potentially some training camp battles. We're going to be looking at that as well. Also, some names that could potentially steal a spot on the roster once we get closer to the final cut down days. So let's just jump right into it at the pass rusher position because this is the position that is gone talked about the most, I would say, in the last few days because we have the most recent addition, and that is Von Miller. Also, do want to mention the depth chart you're seeing up here is based on what ESPN slash the Commanders website has. It's not the actual. Don't take it for this is what uh, Coach Dan Quinn is saying or anything like that. Just wanted to put the players in a position and all on the same page. So starting with the pass rusher position, let's talk about Von Miller because this was the most recent addition for the Washington Commanders. Von Miller signed with Washington on a 1-year, $6.1 million deal up to $10 million based on incentives. I believe those incentives are very sack reliant based on the numbers of sacks he gets this upcoming season. Nick, what are your first initial thoughts on the signing? Von Miller, this is going to be a guy who's a future Hall of Famer now on the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, no, I really like it. Surprised me. It's always, well, I guess now it's weird that guys actually want to come here and ring chase, which is very that's a new feeling. But yeah, no, I like it. I think the one thing that this defense was really missing was a pass rusher, and while he's not going to be an every down guy, he's still got the juice. When he's out on the field, he still can win. He still can get to the passer, and that's what this team really needs, especially on third down. So I think it's a great addition. Hopefully he can stay healthy and kind of be a rotational pass rusher.
Yeah, last season his numbers were surprisingly good when I looked at them based on his, he was more of a limited role, but when he's not the main guy, I still think he definitely has some juice that he can bring to this Washington team, this Washington pass rushing room. Lost Dante Fowler in free agency. Fowler led the team in sacks with 10.5 last season. So that is a lot of production that was lost when Fowler signed with the Cowboys during free agency. But Washington, not only did they just sign Von Miller, but back in March, they signed Dietrich Wise and Jacob Martin as well to kind of fill out this pass rushing room, this defensive end room for Washington. So those were two other free agent additions. You look at Wise, Martin, Miller, all being added on to this room that already had Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Farrell. Would you say this position group has upgraded, downgraded, or about stayed the same in terms of talent in the room?
I think it's probably about stayed the same. This was the one area that I think throughout the offseason that I think that they should have gone a little bit heavier with.
Mm-hmm.
Just not in terms of body weight, but
Yeah.
put a little bit more capital into this position. I think Dorrance Armstrong is a very solid player. I think Wise is just is a good player, and I think you have a lot of good players at edge, and you're really missing kind of that big piece. I think we were all kind of hoping for some sort of trade, big name guy to come in, but it looks like Von Miller is going to be that big name, which I do believe is an upgrade over Dante Fowler if he can stay healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think they're still missing that big edge rusher that can really kind of cause some havoc on a every down basis and not just kind of like third down pass rush specialist. You kind of really need that edge rusher out there almost every play.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of fans that really wanted to trade for Trey Hendrickson or, Max Crosby was in some talks before he got his long-term deal. So there was a lot of names that was thrown around on Commanders Twitter over the past couple of months. But this room, I feel like is going to be kind of settled. I don't really see any other additions to this room heading into, week 1 this season, unless we get some injury to this room or something, out of the ordinary happens. But I do think, some fans wanted more of a emphasis, like you mentioned, on the pass rushing room, especially in the draft. I feel fans were kind of surprised that Washington didn't, add anyone on the edge. But going overall, though, I think, this is definitely about stayed the same, like you said, in terms of talent in this room. But it's going to be different because there are new guys, and this is one of the positions where there was the most change, I feel, this offseason for Washington. So One other person I want to mention from this room is Javonte Jean-Baptiste, because JJB we saw last year had some flashes. The 7th round pick in 2024 out of Notre Dame. Could we see, maybe a year two leap for JJB? Or, well, what are your, thoughts on his role? Or do you think he's kind of going to be behind these guys like Armstrong and Miller still, and not really have that much of a impact, or be able to have that much of an impact this season just because there's guys ahead of him?
Yeah, I mean, outside of possible injury, I do think that he's going to still kind of be that guy down there. Yeah, really, really limited role last year. Like you said, showed a little bit of flashes, but obviously can't get that sort of consistency if you're not playing as often. So tough for me to kind of put my faith in a 7th round edge rusher to kind of really step up and be the guy. But if he does, that'd be huge for this defense. Just to kind of, like you said, have somebody that could step up there. But I'm not gonna hold my breath on that one.
Mhm. Yeah, last season, Washington, Adam Peters, they kept 4 edge rushers on the final roster in 2024. I feel this is going to be very competitive. We could definitely see some, versatility on this defensive line as we can kind of shift to the interior now too, with players like Javon Kinlaw who can kind of play both on the inside and outside. It'll be interesting to see how many true edge rushers Washington keeps, just because last year they kept 4, and I'm looking at this: Armstrong, Wise, Miller, JJB, and Martin. I feel all have a shot to make the final roster, or those are probably going to be the favorites to make the final roster once we get to late August. So let's move on though to the inside of the defensive line. The big loss here, I think, is Jonathan Allen. Allen's been the starter for Washington for, I don't remember how long it was, 6 years, I think,
Something
7 years,
like that, yeah.
for a while. So now that he's not here, we definitely should see a bigger role for Johnny Newton. I think that's kind of the big, question here. Can Johnny Newton take that sophomore leap? We saw some flashes from him last season. What are your thoughts now? Allen's gone. Newton, ever since he got drafted, seemed like he was going to be the guy to replace Allen once he left. Now it's time for him to shine. So, what are your thoughts on Newton? How much confidence do you have in him heading into this year?
Yeah, that's the big. They're putting a lot of weight on his shoulders here. I'm not a huge fan of what they've got going on the interior. I think really just as a D line as a whole, I think losing Jonathan Allen and then bringing in someone like Kinlaw is you're kind of getting that same sort of player who can show some flashes as a pass rusher, but against the run he's going to struggle. He's struggled his entire career, despite how big he's been. It's just a problem. I mean, last year. If you're kind of looking at the current roster, what we have, there's not a single player on that defensive line outside of Dorrance Armstrong that had a PFF grade higher than 65. And for people that don't know, a 60 grade is an average grade. So we're essentially considering all of these players below average, which is a big problem when we all kind of saw that last year run defense was a huge problem on that defensive line. So that's my biggest concern on this entire team, is really the defensive tackles here. But I think if Johnny Newton steps up in a big way, that fills a lot of problems. I was a huge fan of the draft pick when they got him. I thought he was a first-round talent, shouldn't have slid that far. Had some moments last year, but really kind of struggled in the run game, was getting moved around way too easily. But I am excited to see what he can do in the second year. I think he was kind of thrust into a position that he wasn't truly ready for right off the bat. But yeah, they're putting a lot of weight on his shoulders, because I think there's just not a lot behind him, and he really will need to take a step up.
Yeah, you mentioned the depth beyond Payne and Newton. Javon Kinlaw was one of Washington's first free agent signings. They ended up paying him, I believe, 3 years, 30 something million for Javon Kinlaw. I think this is probably another one of those question marks, which we don't know the production Kinlaw is going to be able to bring to this defensive line. But one thing I do want to mention here is the versatility that Kinlaw does have. He played about half of his snaps on the edge and half of his snaps on the inside for San Francisco last year. And you look at the kind of the guys behind him and the depth of the edge. If Washington were to keep, 8 defensive linemen, which is what they did last year, I feel 5 edge rushers and Payne, Newton, Kinlaw, I think could be those, they'll end up being those 8 guys.
Yeah, I'm just the Kinlaw signing was especially it being the first big one, was kind of it was not great for me to see. It's just he's kind of been the type of guy that, again, 14th pick in the first round, um, just 6'5", 320. Like, he's an absolute physical specimen. Um, and banking on him to finally figure it out after year 5 is, again, you're putting a lot of weight on this guy. Never had a career grade over 55, which is just rough. So again, you're kind of putting a lot of pressure on guys that have not truly performed too well. So again, this is my biggest worry. And I hope that I am wrong about a lot of these guys.
Yeah. Beyond Kinlaw, Eddie Goldman was another free agent signing for this Washington team. Hopefully, the Goldman signing, they're hoping he can bring some run defense which Washington lacked last season. But I don't know. His contract is very movable, so again, it's up in the air. And then beyond those guys, a bunch of practice squad players from last year and a UDFA signing in Ricky Barber as well. I believe out of UCF.
I
On
will
the
say that Sheldon Day was honestly one of their best defensive tackles last year, which that's a compliment to Sheldon Day, but it's also kind of it's not great when he is one of your best defensive tackles. I think he was the most consistent out of all of them. So I think he's got a spot on this roster again. And but yeah, again, it's just not great when he was probably your most consistent interior defensive lineman.
Yeah, and he ended up playing a lot down the stretch. I believe week 10 onwards due to some injuries. Day
Yep.
was activated for pretty much every single game, which I'm looking against Pittsburgh, 89.9 PFF grade for
Yeah.
Sheldon Day. I got to look back at that because that is
he
crazy.
had some moments, man. He had some really good
Mhm.
moments.
Yeah, so that's the defensive tackle room. Let's move on to the linebackers because I feel this position we kind of know what's going in, what
Yep.
we have going into this upcoming season, which you can't really say that about some of these other positions on the defensive side of the ball. But Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu are going to be the duo again for Washington. It's going to be a lot of two linebacker and nickel formations, which they did a lot of last year. So beyond Wagner and Louvu, though, I think what is where we can kind of talk about Jordan McGee and Kane Madrano because those are two young players. We didn't see a lot of McGee last year. He had a couple of injuries. He's still kind of a question mark. And then Madrano was someone that Washington drafted just this past draft in 2025. What are your thoughts on McGee, Madrano, and potentially is this preseason pretty big for both of those guys?
Yeah, I would say so. I haven't had too much time to watch Madrano as much, but when I was watching McGee last year in college, there was clearly a lot that he still needed to learn as a linebacker. He needed to get a little bit bigger, but man, he can make some plays. He's a freak athlete as well. So having a year played behind Bobby Wagner, behind Frankie Louvu, I think he can kind of play similar to Louvu. Might not be as aggressive. I don't think anyone really is, but he can kind of have that step up. So I'm excited to see what he has there because again, he's a really, really good athlete, and that's a great place to start when you're a linebacker. And yeah, a whole year of watching Bobby Wagner play is probably a really good thing to have.
Yeah, it is, especially at his age. Having a healthy Bobby Wagner is huge for this defense because beyond Wagner and Louvu, again, it's a pretty big question mark just because we haven't seen either of those guys really on the field a lot for Washington. Majano we just drafted, so it's
Yeah.
still kind of a big question mark there. But uh, also beyond those guys, I would probably expect Nick Bellore to be on this final roster just because of the special teams impact that he had on this team. One of the best special teamers, in my opinion, last year for Bellore. So I would expect Bellore to be back. And then Cam Arnold and Ali Kaho are the two UDFA linebackers for Washington, which is definitely I haven't watched on either of those guys yet,
Yeah, I was
but
about to say I'm gonna have to let you take the reins on
yeah.
that one.
Yeah, it was two guys. I was doing research on this, two guys that are UDFAs for Washington, but I guess you never know. They could maybe, be a practice squad guy for this team, make a few plays in the preseason. It could be fun to watch, of course. But let's move on now to cornerbacks because this cornerback position is probably one of the more fun positions to watch because there's going to be a lot of, you could say, star power in this cornerback room. Marshawn Lattimore, of course, leads this off. A healthy Lattimore will be huge for Washington. We'll start with him. How do you expect Lattimore to start this season? Just because of inconsistency. I think that happened last season, towards the end of last season for a guy like Lattimore. He was hampered by injuries a ton. So, what are you hoping to see out of Lattimore? What would you consider maybe a successful start to Lattimore's season?
Um, Honestly, a successful start to his season is playing 3 consecutive games.
Mhm.
That's really the biggest key with Lattimore. It's been the biggest thing for the last 5 years of his career is just being on the field and being healthy. Last year, I'm hoping that the injury was the reason for kind of the lack of play that they expected from him. Um, but again, if you get a big jump from Lattimore and you get the guy that you saw a couple of years ago who can play every single game, maybe miss a game or two, then I think you're in a very, very good spot with this cornerback room. But yeah, the injuries are just a huge, huge question mark with him. It always will be.
Yeah, and Washington added a couple of names as well towards the top of this cornerback room. Trey Amos, the rookie out of Ole Miss, second round pick for Washington just this past draft, and Jonathan Jones as well, a free agent signing from New England, were the two additions. But some guys that are returning for Washington, Mike Sanderstill and Noah Benogany. I'll start with Sanderstill. Do you kind of expect him to now move back inside to into the slot position, which he kind of played a lot of at Michigan, but was moved to the outside due to some injuries and lack of good play from others in the cornerback room on the outside last season? Does the addition of Trey Amos and Jonathan Jones push Sanderstill back inside, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of the natural move for him. But then, I mean, kind of going back to the Lattimore thing, if he gets injured again, you know that you have a guy in Sandersill that can just step right back outside and play at a really, really high level. So he is a very, very important piece on this defense. I love what he did last year, kind of playing both the nickel and outside corner and playing it at a very high level as a rookie. It was just awesome to see. So if you can have any sort of similar production from Trey Amos, then this secondary room is in a much, much better position. But yeah, I love Sanders still. I think he is a great fit for this defense. I love the Trey Amos pick. I would have been happy if they picked him in the first round. So getting him in the second was awesome. I think this cornerback room is in a much better spot. And yeah, corner linebackers. This is where I will be happy with what they did. It didn't start out too well with the D line, but yeah, I really like what they did here.
Yeah, and you mentioned I mentioned the depth here. I feel like is a big improvement compared to the last few seasons for this Washington team. They have spent more capital on this cornerback room, but I feel like it's going to pay off just because of the depth alone, especially when you have a player like Lattimore who may not play, or probably won't play 17
Yeah,
games this year. Having a guy like spending a second round pick on Amos, free agent signing like Jones, I feel is going to be great for this Washington cornerback room. So I'm also excited to see this cornerback room and how they can perform. Fentrell Cypress is a UDFA out of Florida State who I think I don't know just because of the guys in front of him if he will make the initial roster, but I do think he is someone to keep an eye on just in case there are some injuries and he does end up being on Washington's practice squad that could potentially get some playing time for Washington. I believe he got a pretty hefty UDFA deal from the Commanders as well. But the cornerback room is definitely, I feel, where it's at with the most star power on this defense. I guess you could say the linebacker room as well with Wagner and Luga there, but
yeah.
I'm super excited to see this cornerback room and some of the new names in it this upcoming season. All right, let's move on to kind of the last couple of positions here, strong safety and free safety. I do want to mention I put Dom Hampton here because he's now listed as a safety on the Commanders website, which I think he was originally drafted as a linebacker safety hybrid. So that is, I guess, something to note with where Dan Quinn and this team kind of views him. But Will Harris, I think, is the biggest and kind of only new addition to this safety room. But he is going to play a pretty big role on this team as he's going to be replacing Jeremy Chin, who Washington lost in free agency to the Las Vegas Raiders. What were your thoughts on the Will Harris signing and basically letting Jeremy Chin go to now bring in a guy like Will Harris?
Yeah, I think when I first saw the Will Harris signing, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about him. Watched a lot of his film, and I did like what I saw. Looked to be a very smart player. Looked to come downhill violently, which is what you want to see from a strong safety. So I think worst case scenario is he will play up to the level that we saw Jeremy Chin. I think you could have a slight upgrade there, but yeah, I like that signing. I think he'll fit in pretty well. and kind of fit right in at that strong safety position.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty safe signing for Washington, in my opinion, and someone who will definitely be able to make an impact starting week one for this Washington team. Quan Martin is entering year three, I believe now, three for Quan Martin. So that is
Yep,
going
year
to
three.
be, yeah, year three. So that is going to be, hopefully he can take another step up. I feel like his play did really improve from his rookie year to last season. So if you can take another step up and play, that would be great for Washington. Percy Butler and Jeremy Reeves, I feel like they're going to have a pretty big impact on this team just because they're going to be, the backups again. Butler played a good amount last season, I felt like, and Reeves as well on the defensive side of the ball. How confident are you on the depth of this safety position? Just because it's kind of staying the same for Washington this season.
Yeah, I like it. I think you have a lot of really solid players. I think Quan Martin has kind of proved that he can handle the free safety role.
Mhm.
They played a lot of single high last year. I think they're going to play a lot more single high this year, and I think he can handle that position. He's shown that he can be a serviceable safety. That's really kind of all you need back there. Sure, you would like to see more picks and be a ball hawking type of safety, but he does his job, and that's all you can really ask for. Same with Reeves. Every time he comes in, does his job. Percy Butler's a bit more of a wild card. You don't really know what you're going to truly get from him.
Mhm.
They played him a lot in the box, free safety. Um, so yeah, just kind of all over the place. But yeah, I do think that they have some pretty good depth, and you kind of touched on Dom Hampton. Nobody really knows what he's going to do.
Yeah.
The body type is insane to play at safety or linebacker. Obviously, Quinn's had some success with that type of safety. I'm not going to say he's Cam Chancellor, but he does look like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm intrigued to see what they do here. I like what they did. I think it's a very solid group, and I think that's all you really need from your safeties is just do your job.
Yeah. It's going to be a pretty important preseason, in my opinion, for Dom Hampton. And also a guy who I'm, rooting for is Tyler Owens, the UDFA out of Texas Tech. He made the final roster last season for Washington, and he now enters year two. He mainly was just playing on special teams, which he made a couple of really good plays, in my opinion, plays, if I remember right, last season on special teams. But could we see again this back half of the depth chart for the safety position is kind of all up in the air. So Owens, I feel, definitely has an opportunity to kind of be, one of the first backups to a Will Harris or Quan after it'd probably be strong safety just because of how big he is. But
Yep.
uh, it, to Will Harris if he has a pretty good preseason. So guys like Tyler Owens and Dom Hampton, I feel it's a pretty big preseason to show what they've got for this defense and for this safety
Yeah,
room.
they're just question
But
marks. You just don't
mhm,
really know. And like you said, preseason is going to be huge for him. Tough to say that if he's going to step up or do anything, but we do, like you said, know that he's a good special teams player, and you still need those guys on your roster.
yeah, but overall, this defense, I feel a lot has changed in terms of the impact players, but especially compared to if the offense got some, due to some trades, they got some improvements. But free agency wise, this is where kind of Washington spent a lot of money paying Will Harris, Von Miller now as well, Javon Kinlaw, Dietrich Wise, and Jonathan Jones were kind of a lot of their big free agent signings. So overall, give me a confidence level 1 through 10. You feel in this defense heading into this year?
Ooh.
I know
I'll
I'm putting you on the spot
say
here.
I'll say a solid like 6.5. I think I've
Okay.
already kind of touched on my D line worries. I think that's a huge concern for me. I just don't think they did enough to address that. Um, and linebacker, you have two studs. I think it's probably you could argue the best linebacker room in the NFL with Wagner and
Mhm.
Luvu. I really like what they did with corner. I like what they have at safety, but it's not really enough for me to kind of outweigh my concerns with that defensive line. So yeah, I'd say like a solid 6.5 to a 7. Johnny Newton
Okay.
steps up, bump that up to a
Yeah.
7.5, and 8. But yeah,
Okay.
biggest
Yeah.
concerns on that defensive line.
It is also year two with Joe Witt and the change of
Yep.
scheme, especially for the guys that were here for the Ron Rivera era as
Yeah, and
well.
he proved to do a lot with a little. And having
That is
someone
true.
like Bobby Wagner and him coming back was honestly one of the best signings. Same with Zach Ertz, but that's offense. But he proved to do a lot with a little. So I'm excited to see what he can do with some better players, especially on the back end. I'm just excited to see it. I hope to God that I am wrong about that defensive line.
Mhm. All right. Well, last season, Washington's defense ranked 22nd in EPA per play, 18th in success rate. But from weeks 10 through 18, it improved to 19th in EPA per play and 6th in success rate. So we did see some improvement towards the back end of the regular season for this Washington defense. And now year 2 under Joe Witt, I will say there's a lot to be excited about for this defense. Just a lot of names, fun names to watch, names that we haven't really gotten a chance to see a lot of, but have a lot of talent on this defense. But that'll pretty much wrap up this episode. Nick, where can people find your work on PFF?
Yeah, just Twitter or X is where I'll post everything at PFF_Nick Akridge. Yeah, I'll be writing some quarterback stuff. I wrote a Jaden Daniels article recently. Going to try to get through the rest of the rookie quarterbacks, but I know Commanders fans probably don't care too much about that. But yeah, I'll be writing some stuff throughout the season, obviously posting grades throughout the season. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, that'll wrap up this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. We'll be back next week with more. See you guys next one. Peace.